The internet can be an inherently distancing space. It can artificially reduce a whole person down to one video, one dimension, in a way that's a lie, and a very dangerous one. So I'm going to introduce myself, and through that I will address some controversy about me that you've likely run into, or will. This will also clarify the boundaries of my page. For me, there's no difference between my life, my thoughts around the controversy about me, and the boundaries of this page, so this video is all three. I know many of you have been waiting for this video, and I appreciate your patience. It took time for me to find what feels like clear integrity in how to say all this, and I know that my silence around some of this has also not been in integrity with the conversation that I am a part of, and I've felt that. And I'm sorry for the time it's taken me to speak. It was for the sake of saying it the best I can. I've written and deleted and rewritten parts of this many times over, and it hasn't felt right until now. This is a long video which covers a lot of ground, but where it goes might be the most important thing I have to contribute to the dialogues of our time, and it's likely going to bring up strong emotions. Because of this, I take the time to get there in the most accessible way that I can. So if you're staying, I invite you to settle in. I'm going to introduce myself and share a brief biography, both so that you know more fully who you're listening to, and because for me it's simply inseparable from my conclusions. I think parts of it are hilarious, parts of it are heartbreaking, and all of it is illuminating and informative for anyone who has opinions, good or bad, about my voice and past. But you may not care at all about my life or want to listen to me talk for that long, and I totally respect that. So if you're more interested in the controversy and the channel boundaries, you're welcome to skip to this timestamp. I won't be offended, and like most of my videos, you'll get it all from the audio, although there are some pictures mixed in for flavor. A little about me. My name's Jack. I was born and raised in the woods of Maine. My family was a confusing mix of things that's hard to describe. We were very low income and pretty solidly rednecks, but because my parents were both ministers, we lived in church-provided houses, and we were kind of middle class. I grew up happily playing in the woods most of the time. I didn't know we were poor. I actually thought we were wealthy because we had a house and functional vehicles, while most of my friends lived in broken-down, leaky trailers. I have 4 older sisters who were large influences on me, but I spent as little time at home as I could. I learned to hunt and fish from an early age, spent a lot of time in the forest. I spent a lot of time collecting bottles on the side of the road to redeem for new fishing lures and soda, while idealizing the trucks full of teenage rednecks who ripped around blowing holes in street signs and throwing me more empty beer cans, which looked amazing. Those were my heroes. We lived in tents in the woods for at least a month every year up to camp, went canoeing all the time. I grew up splitting wood, target practicing, gutting animals. When I was 5, the KKK burned a cross on our lawn and marched around it for a while. My dad stood in the door with a loaded 12 gauge, made quite an impression on me. First time I heard the word internet was when a door-to-door email salesman came when I was like 10. To know me, you have to know my father, which is hard. He was a second-generation Celtic immigrant from Cornwall. My mother also has Cornish blood, and this was a central identity in our home. So my grandfather was Cornish, but my grandmother was from redneck stock, and my father grew up in that world, so that was a lot of our culture in many ways. But while dirt poor rednecks, we were also bizarrely overeducated. My father had 2 PhDs. He was a psychotherapist as well as a minister, but I'm concerned that when you hear that, you'll get a really inaccurate picture of my dad. He was first and foremost a redneck. If you're picturing a psychotherapist or a minister, you're off base. Let me show you. This is my dad and me. This is what he looked like all my life. He wanted to spend all his time hunting and fishing and drinking and smoking and running trucks around, and he taught me a lot of what I love most in the world: how to live by rod and rifle, how to love the forest, and much more. His PhD is really only showed in his ferocious education of us. He read to all of his children every night, everything from Tolkien to Plato, MLK to Hawking. This gave me a passionate, lifelong love of reading, anything and everything, which I'm deeply grateful for. He made us all study piano, and he was a very talented musician, and he made us each pick instruments. I picked trumpet when I was 8, and I've loved it ever since. And he trained us ruthlessly in a million ways. He would just randomly engage in formal debate with me from the time I was like 7. Totally random issues out of the blue. He'd be like, "Abortion, pick a side." And I'd have to argue against or for abortion with him. We'd do that for 5 minutes, and he'd yell, "Switch," and use all the arguments I'd just made against me. Over and over, making us argue against the position we'd just held, never knowing when we'd have to do a 180. He ruthlessly called out logical fallacies and mistakes, and then he'd switch and show us how to argue the point more coherently. He absolutely loved it. If we ever caught him in a fallacy, he'd actually pay us if we could catch him in fallacies. It was intense, and I loved it. He was also a deeply wounded man. He was savagely physically abused all through his childhood, and he was very transparent that he became a psychotherapist to understand his own wounds, studied religion to save his own soul, and never succeeded at either. He was wildly with the full weight of his brutal childhood trauma manifesting through his dual PhDs in psychology and divinity, driving a severe and twisted weave of daily mental and physical abuse of everyone and everything in our home. Anything he was holding and his body could become a physical weapon at any second with zero warning or cause. I was terrified of him and avoided him as much as possible, which led me to spend a lot of my childhood alone in the woods, often for nights at a time. My mother suffered the worst of it, of course, and spent all her energy trying to shield us from him, often in ways that were also quite harmful. She was heavily dissociated and full of understandable, bitter rage. So the forest was where I felt safe from an early age, and I spent a lot of time there. If you've ever seen Captain Fantastic, picture that dad, but make him incredibly wounded and wildly aggressive. And you're pretty close to looking at my father. Like, when my oldest sister got her first period, he made a giant, round, blood-red cake and invited the whole community over for a party to celebrate and enjoy this cake. This was obviously mortifying for my sister, and almost certainly had the exact opposite of his intended effect, but you can see how he was trying to not make it shameful and to celebrate it as a rite of passage, right? He was a complicated man. In junior high, my family moved to Massachusetts. My experience of this was that I went from spending all my time in the woods, happily avoiding my horrible father, to a world of intense drugs, pornography, a very different kind of violence than the working out our differences fights I grew up with in Maine. In Maine, we all knew each other. In Mass, groups of older teens you'd never met would jump you and just wreck you for no reason at all, and you'd never see them again. It was a different world. I started taking martial arts classes because I needed them. And since there was no forest, there was no safety, no escape at all. Just my father at home and horrible, dangerous, anonymous people everywhere else. It felt like I had moved to hell. I almost immediately became addicted to alcohol and hard drugs and spent the next decade in escalating addiction. I don't think I was healthy in Maine, but in Massachusetts I became severely emotionally dissociated. I remember on 9/11, my friends and I laughing at the people jumping off the towers. I started getting into a lot of trouble with the law, caught dozens of charges, including a handful of felonies for possession, theft, vandalism, fighting cops. Everyone told me I was stupid and ruining my life, and I believed them. All my sisters were straight-A students, full rides to Ivy Leagues. None of them have ever been arrested to this day, so the contrast was sharp in my family. I thought the only way to save myself from myself was to join the Marine Corps, so I wore dog tags and tried to impress recruiters with how many push-ups I could do as an early teen. My father was so proud. The only reason I didn't was because my martial arts instructor taught me that I was always responsible for my body as a weapon. And this was right at the start of the Iraq War. And reflecting on what my martial arts teacher had said, and listening to Bush talk, I slowly realized that I didn't trust Bush to use my body as a weapon ethically in Iraq, so I didn't enlist. Once when my old man was bailing me out of jail one morning after another rough night, while I was still wrecked and expecting him to be horrible, he just sat on the cell next to me and said, "Son, I know that a young man can walk real close to the line and still turn into a fine man." It meant a lot to me. He also once told me that anything I could do which would make him not love me would also make me not me anymore, so it wouldn't be me that he didn't love. I think he genuinely meant it as supportive, but his love was explicitly conditional. The only joy I had in high school was working with kids. I worked at an after-school program for the YMCA, and in the summer, as a junior counselor up at a summer camp I'd gone to as a kid, which meant I got to go back to Maine and spend time in the woods. I loved helping kids learn to canoe and tie knots. I spent as much time as I could in Maine every summer, studying and teaching wilderness skills. Sophomore year, I transferred to a democratic school, where the students hired and fired the staff and determined their own courses of study, which may have saved my life. Around 17, I moved out to escape my father and lived homelessly on the streets of Boston. My mother left him around the same time, and he immediately became suicidal and wanted to drink with me in really unhealthy ways and talk about how he wasn't going to be alive much longer. I was furious. I bawled him out, saying, "You piece of you don't get to take a coward's way out of what you've done. You owe me time and conversations about the harm you've caused." He drunkenly cried and agreed. Like a month later, while my sister was in labor with his first grandchild, he tried to take his own life, took his car up to a $130 on the highway and let it drift off the road. He never said it, but I suspect he was trying to not hurt another generation. I took all his firearms away while he was in the hospital, and we child-proofed his house. He was working as a minister the entire time, and after that, he assaulted multiple women in his congregation and was driven out of the ministry. While I was helping him move out of the church-owned house he was being thrown out of, as we were moving a bookcase, he fell off a moving van ramp and cracked his head into a set of concrete steps. Suffered frontal bilateral hematomas, fell into a coma for a month or so. We thought he was dying, but he recovered in an intense way. I remember the first time I talked to him when he woke up, I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "Well, son, if the universe is a sprinkling of stardust, then I have just a little less stardust than I should right now." I dropped out of high school without ever getting a degree and lived in Boston for maybe 8 months. I built a fixed gear and stuck a big feminist sticker on the side, and I did a lot of stupid and dangerous things. But I missed the forest, so I ran back to Maine where I really leaned into studying what white people call survival skills or primitive skills. Bird language, tracking, friction fires, wild edibles, shelters. I loved it all. Learning to hear what the birds are saying, learning to make fire with nothing at all, not even a knife, spending long stretches of time living in the bush with just a sheath knife, stalking up to herds of deer at night, tanning hides, learning to walk in shallow water so smoothly that you don't make a ripple, stalking through 4 feet of snow at night in nothing but a bathing suit and a blindfold towards the sound of a drum a mile away, intense scout games with wonderful people, all sorts of nonsense we got up to. I lived in a thatched stone shelter I built in the woods, and I was very happy. People celebrated my background in woodcraft in that community, which was different and new for me. Growing up, it was just redneck stuff. I got a job as a carpenter to keep paying for more advanced outdoor skills classes, but there was a lot of white powder on that job site, and I didn't like my prospects. So I went to college, got my GED to do so, which is a ridiculously easy thing to do if anyone's curious. I double majored in biology and education, and lived on an anarchist farm collective that I loved while spending as much time as I could studying and teaching primitive skills. I took up Wing Chun, and I loved it. I picked up an apprenticeship in Finnish woodworking and made a lot of sawdust. It was in college that a friend of mine pulled me aside one day and told me that I had a wake, that I was causing harm to women I was dating and sleeping with in our community. This was really hard for me to hear because I thought of myself as respecting women, as an ally, as a feminist. We started a men's group together, and with those men I faced some of the harm that I had caused and learned that I was far from alone in having caused harm to women. I attended workshops on consent and began disclosing my pattern of harm to every new prospective partner, asking for their support and practicing consent in a respectful way. I was almost a straight-A student in college, partially because as long as I maintained above a 3.5 GPA, half my tuition was covered under an academic scholarship, and if I lost that, there was no way I could afford to stay in school, and partially because my time in a democratic high school had showed me that despite my catastrophic failures in public school and thinking of myself as very stupid, I actually really loved learning. I graduated college with high honors and then worked as a biology teacher in a public school. I took every class outside and taught biology how I loved it, in the forest. I continued focusing on primitive skills all the time. It was through primitive skills that I met some native elders and saw how differently they moved in the world and what their impacts were in their communities. So when I learned what was happening to the Navajo elders who were living in resistance to the forced relocation on Black Mesa, that they were requesting white allies to come support their resistance, I quit my job, packed up, and moved out there to support them. That was eye-opening. I was happy there, spending 8 or 10 hours a day in the desert, usually on horseback. Most days just herding sheep and goats, but occasionally wrangling cattle and bighorns, hunting fresh meat. Spent a lot of time dodging the corporate paramilitaries, helping elders hide the horses that the paramilitaries constantly try to steal and kill, among other terrible things that they do, and occasionally getting caught and brutalized by the corporate paramilitaries. It was a context to apply all of the wilderness skills I'd been studying for years in a way that actually mattered, and wasn't just mostly white guys playing in the woods. I saw how everything I loved most in the world came from indigenous people. I had known that what we call primitive skills are indigenous skills, but I didn't really know it. And I certainly didn't know how deeply out of integrity the schools and communities of mostly white people I'd learned all those skills from were with indigenous people. I deeply loved the elders I lived with, and they loved me. The matriarch wanted me to stay forever, and that sounded great. But after 6 months, her son came home. He had drunk himself out of a marriage, and he was in a very bad place, drinking heavily and being rough on his mother. When I was there to herd sheep every day, he could just stay at home and drink. So in order to help keep that elder safe, by giving her son a job that was good for him and kept him away from her and the bottle, I packed up and left, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. If he hadn't come home, I would live on Navajo today. I did not want to leave. So I left, sobbing, and tried to drive home, and I made it as far as Santa Fe, where I got stuck, and then lived there for about 6 years, hunting elk and wild hogs and volunteering at a community bike collective and hanging out at Upaya and Annapurnas a lot. I volunteered at a local women's self-defense workshops, and I continued to practice transparency with all my new partners about my past and paid really close attention to consent and not causing harm in that particular way. And I was kind of a douchey, self-absorbed boy with terrible communication skills and very little empathy. Like, I did a lot of slow Wing Chun and bouncy slacklining in public parks, hoping to be seen. I played a lot of mournful jazz trumpet solos with my dog late at night on street corners, hoping to be heard. I thought I was incredibly hot and enlightened and generally better than everyone I dated, while being deeply insecure and in life-threatening addiction. It was a bad combination, and even with my clear intentional consent practices, I was still hurting a lot of people. I worked as a teacher at a democratic school there, where I taught classes on whatever the students asked me to that I could offer. So everything from blacksmithing to biology, dog training to consent, animal slaughter and butchering to woodcraft, tracking, wild edibles. It was an incredible job and community. And I ran outdoor summer camps for a lot of the same kids in the off-season. The students kept hiring me every year, and every year they gave all the staff professional feedback. And one year, they told me that I was like a bear who was really good at catching fish, but thought he was a little better at catching fish than he actually was. Still, the best piece of professional feedback I've ever received. After a few years, the students told me that they loved me and my classes very much and wanted me to keep working there, but that I had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol and that I had to stop drinking if I wanted to keep my job. Since they were my direct employers, this was not an empty threat. And they were absolutely right. While I was dangerously high functioning, my mental health had been catastrophic for the entire previous decade and kind of in free fall. I was using dangerous levels of drugs and alcohol and spent a lot of time at night drunkenly sobbing with the barrel of a pistol in my mouth, hating myself so much, so convinced that healing was impossible, hating my father and men and masculinity so much that I was convinced the world would be better off with one less harmful man in it. The men's work I had done had helped me stop causing direct harm in the ways that I had caused harm and opened up a lot of things, but I was far from healthy. I loved that job and that community, and I could tell they were right. So with a lot of support, I got clean and sober. And I remain eternally grateful to that group of students and that community. Through all these years, my father regularly needed to move from different elder care facilities because he kept harassing and assaulting other women. Part of this was the brain injury. Bilateral hematomas remove any filter from the survivor's mind, so whatever thought he had just came out of his mouth. He didn't have any regulation. But the larger part by far was just who he had always been. A deeply wounded, racist, sexist, dangerous man who never really saw anyone else as human. Watching it was terrifying. The idea that if I hit my head hard enough, every random thought I had would just spew out like ugly poison onto the people around me was a serious motivator for healing. And it made me hate him even more because of the mirror he held up to me, especially his treatment of women. I saw my mother in every victim of his. I saw myself in his every... I couldn't speak to him for years, and I don't regret that. But the asshole kept writing to me and asking for my poetry. I had used poetry as a tool for emotional processing since I was a kid, and my father had a passionate, lifelong love of poetry. He just spoke in poetry and song probably 20% of the time when I was growing up. And no matter how many times I told him he didn't want to read what I had to write and ignored his requests, he insisted that he did. So finally, I mailed him an absolutely scalding set of poems about his abuse and how much damage he had done to me and my family. And he read it cover to cover. And we were able to have a series of conversations about it, and I was able to ask him what he was thinking about when he was chasing us through the house and abusing us. And he was able to answer with clarity and calmness that I would never in a million years have dreamt possible when I was a teen. And all of that was a direct result of his brain injury. He simply had no ego after that. He was like a totally different person. Even as it opened his brain in a way that made him more dangerous to be around as he people and said wildly harmful stuff, he also basically couldn't walk, and it made it possible for him to face a lot of his past harm, even as he continued causing new harms. It was bizarre, and I made fun of him for it ruthlessly. I remember once when I was leaving the care facility he was living at, where he had made some people very uncomfortable and caused harm, I said, walking away, try not to or scream at anybody, and he just gave me a dark scowl from his wheelchair and said, "You too." I thought it was funny at the time, and it doesn't seem as funny now. I moved back to Maine around 2015 and started an outdoor democratic school with my sister. It was very successful, and within a few years we were working with several hundred kids a week, teaching them wild edibles and tracking and blacksmithing and all sorts of fun games, whatever they wanted to do. We were on the cover of newspapers. I was absolutely sure that running that school was what I was supposed to do for the rest of my life. We were kind of local stars in a funny way. And then a few things happened. The first was that I was invited to start coming to ceremony with some Penobscot and other native folks. I'd been to ceremonies with some Pueblo folks in the Southwest, but this was different. Literally the day after my first ceremony, the school that I had spent years building and running started to unravel for a variety of reasons. One of which was that someone who I had harmed in college became very public about how I had harmed them. Also, despite our success as a school, as an organization, we were a dumpster fire, so we were not stable or prepared to navigate stressors or even the level of growth that we had currently sustained. My instinct was to immediately affirm the accusations and step out of leadership for a process, but I didn't want to make that decision alone. I didn't think it was mine to make, and our fledgling board thought I was overreacting and strongly advised against this. Rightly or wrongly, I deferred to their decision. The board and other unaffiliated community members approached the person I'd harmed and offered to pay for mediation or whatever type of process felt constructive. And that person I'd harmed declined, and the momentum in the public criticisms of me grew. I leaned into ceremony, and the day after my second ceremony, my house burned down. One of the ceremonial leaders was pretty ruthless about it. She basically said, "You came to ceremony and said your life felt cluttered and you wanted it to be more clear. I don't know what you expected, learn to pray better." The second thing that happened around that time was that my father got sick and was clearly going to die. In light of the community tensions and my father's illness, I took a leave from any work at the school, explicitly to make room for some of those grievances and the process that it was obvious to me was necessary, and also to be with my dying father. My sister also left to be with our father. And despite the other staff doing an absolutely heroic job under very challenging circumstances, the school couldn't handle the combination of the stressors they were facing, covering all of our absences in staffing, and both of the directors taking 6 months to be with their dying father, and it folded. I found a lot of forgiveness from my father as he passed, and he took a lot of heavy wounds into the ground with him in a way that I'm eternally grateful for. Every year of my life, it becomes clearer to me that the healing of my own patterns of harm, my own patriarchy, is completely inseparable from the healing of my relationship with my father. I can't say if this is true for all people, or even all men, but it's certainly true for me. His death was a large part of that, and that work continues for me to this day. Despite ceremony explicitly burning my house down and destroying the school that I'd poured my life into, I could feel that ceremony was exactly what I needed, more than I'd ever needed anything in my life. So I kept going, and the morning after another ceremony, it was like a switch had been flipped in my head. I could see how, even with better consent practices, I was still emotionally dependent on sexuality, and I couldn't even bear the idea of being intimate with anyone at all. All of a sudden, I could see this element of self-loathing that had been central to my life and identity and hidden until that ceremony, and how it drove my need to try and date and sleep with women. I spent a year in intentional celibacy, rebuilding my home and practicing keeping my spaces clean, internal and external. I knew that I never wanted to be with anyone again, unless it was someone who I could imagine marrying and spending the rest of my life with. I poured all my skill in woodcraft into making a beautiful canopy bed, all mortise and tenon, with engravings, with prayers that I would only ever share it with one person, and this was a massive shift from where I'd been. During this time, I wanted to work more with people from my demographic, and with more grounded struggles. Our school was delightful, and it was mostly serving wealthy people from away. So I took a job as the programs director of a recovery nonprofit, and I ran a series of recovery houses, mostly for guys directly coming out of the prison system. I loved this work, and it was intense and grounding for me. It felt more real and closer, because it was. Of my close social circle from high school, most are in active, debilitating addiction, and the rest are by their own hand. I am literally the only one who's alive and sober. My father was a suicidally depressed addict. So the work of that nonprofit and the work of this channel is not distant for me. I know what I'm talking about in these videos about how patriarchy harms men far, far too well. I learned over the bodies of people I loved and the taste of a gun. So I was good at that job, and I liked it. Unfortunately, that organization was also kind of a mess. After a year, they offered me the executive directorship, and when I declined and explained to the board why I thought other organizational work was necessary first, they fired me. Another interesting thing happened during this time. As someone who was out as having caused harm, a lot of people started approaching me. Men who wanted to talk about harm they'd caused and had never had anyone they felt they could talk about it with, and women who wanted to talk about the harm men were causing in our community. So I found myself doing this very specific community work of helping men face their wounds and helping our local community navigate very hard situations. Then, oddly, people I'd never met began to call me and ask for support with situations they were navigating with harmful men, because they had nowhere else to turn. This felt bizarre to me. Who am I to answer these incredibly painful questions or offer any advice on incredibly high-risk situations? I'm an alcoholic who's serious people. Why the hell are you asking me? It took other people saying, "Who are you to refuse to share that experience?" for me to be willing to answer genuinely as best as I could, for whatever it was worth. I made a website, healthecycle.com, and I tried to answer the most common questions I was hearing and offer some resources that had helped me. As part of that, I disclosed my past and posted on my social media another set of clarifications of the ways that I know I've caused harm, apologies, and open invitations to process for anyone who felt harmed by me. It was after this year of celibacy and a lot more ceremony that I stepped into a relationship with my wife. We'd been friends for years, and their previous relationship had come to a close. There was a strong spark that we were both ready for. Then the pandemic hit, and we tried to quarantine. Life got really strange, time bent in weird ways, and I missed men's circles. My wife was like, well, you could try and do some of that work online. I don't like the internet, and it's very addictive for me, so I was hesitant. I'd hated Facebook for a long time, and my wife and I had tried to get into TikTok as an alternative, but never got the hang of it. But then one day I saw a TikTok of a woman asking such a beautiful question about why men hate women that I answered, and that was the start of this channel. When this channel became popular, it was like a floodgate opened. All of a sudden I was getting hundreds and hundreds of DMs and emails daily. I'd say 70% of these are from men, pouring their hearts out, talking about how they've caused harm and how much they hate themselves for it, how my videos and my website are the first place they've ever felt seen, talking about how they showed their buddy who just realized that he hurt a woman a video that I made on having caused harm and it prevented that man from taking his own life. Men desperate for advice, but mostly just men who've never felt seen before or felt like they can talk about this anywhere. Also, tons of messages from women, hundreds of messages from women talking about how they thought the things on my website were just how sex worked. They didn't even realize they'd been harmed until they saw my work. Everything under the sun. I started getting apology letters from people in my community for the way they'd navigated that situation with my school, talking about how they recognize now that what they were doing wasn't actually healing, and apologizing for how their passion for justice led them to cause harm, both to me and to a whole bunch of kids. Then there was this funny dog pile where I made a video addressing another male creator who had said some pretty harmful things on his platform. My intention with the video was that it was role modeling of how to speak to a guy causing harm in a potentially effective way, but I didn't consider that without making that explicit, it had the effect of minimizing the harm that he's caused and invalidating a lot of the very legitimate criticisms of him. So I took it down and apologized, because making that video without that clarity was harmful of me. But it led to this crazy internet dogpile where a whole bunch of people were all of a sudden really mad at me. I didn't watch many of the videos, but the ones I caught were intense. Guys implying I had deleted a whole secret world of private problematic videos, people saying my wife didn't even exist, that I'd been found out and changed my name to dodge accountability, all kinds of nonsense. If anyone's curious, both my wife and I changed our last names when we got married as a non-patriarchal representation of our relationship. But mostly people were just loudly saying that Jack had just admitted to rape and should be immediately and permanently be canceled. For a decade or so, I did call myself a rapist, both privately and publicly. And I thought that was accountability and honesty. I won't presume to know what that word means to you or anyone, but I will share where I'm at with it today and why. After identifying as such publicly for years, a number of women close to me in my community pulled me aside and said, "You're appropriating that word. I know what is, and what you did isn't it. And when you use that word to describe your past, you dilute it and make it less meaningful, so please stop." They explained that the word is used as a catch-all term for every type of consent violation, sexual assault, and that involves any penetration, and that the lack of meaningful distinctions which that contributes to actually makes comprehension and healing of any of those patterns more challenging. They explained that the context and details matter in order to understand the nature of the wounds we're trying to heal. In different ways, for years, women I respect deeply repeatedly told me that my identifying as a was actually not helpful and maybe even actively harmful. This was hard for me to hear. I initially heard it as just giving me an out to avoid responsibility, but it was meaningful work and I listened, so today I don't identify one way or another. My past is an open book. Anyone who likes can go learn exactly what my history is. And for me, the question actually isn't that important today. The fact that I had a pattern of consent violations that constituted sexual assault is what matters to me, and that is unequivocally true. I hurt people. Whether that pattern of harm crossed some technical line towards constituting rape is kind of arbitrary to me. It's less about my identity and more about what supports other men in recognizing these patterns earlier on and causing less harm, and my transparency and specificity help that. Some people claim that my website is self-serving. They're absolutely right. My transparency about my past helps me. It helps me keep a check on my own ego and emergent patterns, which are, of course, still subtler iterations of the same patterns that led me to cause serious harm 2 decades ago. It helps me in my relationships, being seen and understood clearly and holistically. It helps my community accurately see and understand me better. All of this benefits me. It also creates a natural filter for who spends time and engages with me, which has been incredibly helpful in my life. If that sentence makes you less inclined to engage with me, that's my honesty working as a filter that keeps me safer. So my transparency helps me in a million ways. Some people express concern that it's reharming the women I've harmed. There's a lot of things I think healing patriarchy has to learn from healing addiction, and sharing iterations of harm is one of them. People in recovery are often wildly transparent, sharing harms they've caused with a level of bravery and vulnerability that is stunning. It has the effect of helping others recognize the same patterns in themselves. This is hard-earned wisdom in the recovery community. Simply saying, I've been an alcoholic, does not have the same benefit to people struggling with addiction as describing the patterns involved in alcoholism so that people can see it in themselves. I think I inherit a lot of my ethic from this community. It would be wildly inappropriate for me to out any of my victims. I would never do that. This means that the only way they would be outed is if they disclosed that, which is their prerogative. It's intentional that I only describe my past on my own website with a lot of content warnings, and my tiny community knows it's mine. So the only way that anyone from my past would see that is if they sought it out or if someone else takes it out of context. On the note of prerogative, several of the women who I've harmed have reached out to me to say things like, if you can move past what you did, I think I can too. And several never want any contact with me again, which I totally respect. For me, all I can do is act in the way I want to be treated. If any of the people who've harmed me in my life want to make public statements mentioning the details of the harm they've caused for the sake of supporting others' healing, I support that. And yes, that includes physical, mental, and sexual abuse that I've experienced. My life has not been safe or healthy. That's how I became a fucked up addict and perpetrated a bunch of patterns of harm. My DMs are constantly full of young men who are watching me and my page, and there's 250,000 more who never message me at all. They're here because something I'm saying resonates for them, and they're watching us all. So what are we telling them? What are we telling them about what stepping up and healing their own wounds will do for them? What are we telling them about where fully engaging with the hard work of accountability will get them? Is what we're saying that because of the wounded patterns which young men inherit, which they never asked for, but which led them to cause harm, there's literally nothing they can ever do that will make them a success or welcome or even human? If we're not creating pathways of healing for harmful people that have actual outcomes and making those pathways appealing and accessible, we are simply damned. Nobody's asking for a cookie here or for survivors to take on the work of healing perpetrators, but don't stand in the way of their healing. My mother told me, if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say anything at all. The people who denounce me as a racist think that they're addressing the behavior of sexual violence, but they're not. They're addressing the behavior of attempting to take accountability. They're actively punishing accountability, and this has the effect of driving wounded young men towards Andrew Tate in droves. Those people have made the right the only welcoming space for wounded people, and then we wonder why young men are drifting so far toward the right. These people think they're punishing me for my past, but my past is done. Neither of us can change it, and I'm a relatively healthy person today. I have struggles and a lot of room for growth, and young men could do a lot worse than turning out like me. So what they're doing is just making healing less appealing for wounded men, which has the direct effect of harming uncountable numbers of young women in those young men's lives. By making the extreme far right the only community that welcomes men who have caused harm, these passionate, well-intentioned people are directly contributing to the harm of women. I feel like a lot of the people who want to punish me and shame me forget that the only reason they know anything about my past is because I told them. They're explicitly weaponizing the exact accountability and vulnerability they so loudly claim to wish more men would practice. The irony is profound. I don't mean to paint it as a large problem. It's really not. Maybe a few times a week someone will comment on one of my videos, "Too bad you're a r," or something like that. I delete the comments and block the accounts. Not because I think they're necessarily wrong, but because of the impacts leaving those comments up would have. This space is about healing, and that means making it safe for young men who are, consciously or not, deciding whether or not they will face their harmful patterns. Also, for me to leave those comments up would be to tacitly support a lie. Not about my past, that's not the point. The lie would be that once you acknowledge that you've caused harm, you'll never have safe community again. This is, in my experience, the exact opposite of the truth. For me, once my past was well known, I found the first safe communities that I've ever known. They're feminist spaces, but they're not the young, white, radical feminism I thought was healthy when I was younger. In retrospect, those spaces were never safe or healthy for anyone in them. The specter of punishment and ostracization was always hanging over everyone's head, and there were strict, rigid social hierarchies which often gave the most wounded people the most power. My community today is diverse and loving, and I am accepted and loved holistically in it. This took painful change. I had to let a lot of people I cared about go, and I was canceled by a lot of people I'm very grateful to never have contact with again. Sometimes, one or two of those people come back and apologize to me, and that's connective and interesting. Again, if you had said all that to me when I was 20, I would have insisted that it was self-excusing and that that community was actually super healthy and I was just butthurt because I wasn't welcome. And I'd have been wrong. I wasn't safe there. I don't think anyone's actually safe there. Our efforts to make healthier spaces as younger, radical people were just a coat of feminist paint over the deep internalization of punishment and the belief that we're only safe when we conceal parts of ourselves, and that's not safety at all. It's a deeply capitalist form of love and community that's inherently merit-based and grounded in the abandonment and betrayal of self. It's my father's love. True love, from self or other, can only be experienced when you're fully seen, especially the parts of you that you're most ashamed of. And that shame is intense for men, especially for men who have caused harm, whether they know it or not. It's mostly men who make those comments on my videos, and I always just kind of feel bad for them, because in that one comment, I can see how they're afraid of themselves. They're afraid of being seen. Maybe that's occasionally projection, but I don't think so. The thing that drives men to make those comments is not actually about me. And the actual safety, acceptance, love, and community that I have today is because of my transparency around my past, not because I hide it. I'm not saying it's all roses. The people who think my website is purely self-serving have absolutely no idea what my life is. You think I'll ever get a teaching job again with the level of transparency I practice? You think very wounded men don't feel wholly justified in behavior with me that is totally inappropriate and occasionally dangerous in public? It's not all roses. But the majority of the people who make it not roses identify as allies to women, and they genuinely think they're helping somehow. I originally used just the name Jack on here for privacy because I was concerned about the far right. But to be honest, almost everyone who tries to expose or doxes me is from the left these days, and they do so with the full righteous conviction of someone who knows that they're on the side of God. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. The far right is taking over the country right now. The threat we all face is right-wing. My point is just that a lot of righteous people on the left can't tell when their actions are actually supporting right-wing fascism. And those people, and the people who make comments and videos exposing me, they don't need shame or punishment. It wouldn't help them any more than it helps me or anyone else. They need support and love, but I'm not the person to give it to them. They don't want to hear me, and for me to try would be actively harmful. So I block them for both our benefit and move on. And that's the boundary of this page. I leave up a ton of comments I disagree with as part of the dialogue. I love and welcome disagreement. But when people engage in ways that I think perpetuate the lie that men's lives will be worse when we're accountable, I delete and block. And moderating the full comments of my videos would be more than a full-time job, so some are guaranteed to show up. This is not a safe space, but that is my boundary. So this page is for the small group of people who understand everything I just said. My voice is not for everyone. God, I'm an annoyingly verbose, trauma-riddled, ex-drunk white redneck who's probably on the autism spectrum and comes across as unbelievingly patronizing and holier-than-thou most of the time, with a history of sex. My voice is very, very specific, and I'm absolutely not for everyone. And I know exactly how beneficial my work is for the people who resonate with it. I know because hundreds of people tell me every day. And while the impact I have on the lives of people who resonate with my words and the people in their lives is larger than I would ever have dreamt, that's actually the smallest part of my impact. The largest impact of my work, by far, is this. My transparency forces a conversation that we really need to have. It's a conversation about the difference between supporting men's healing in theory and supporting men's healing in practice. Everyone supports men's healing in theory. That's incredibly cheap and easy. But in practice, supporting men's healing means supporting men who have been wounded, which means supporting men who have caused harm. A great one-liner from the recovery community that a large piece of the feminist community doesn't understand is this. Hurt people hurt people. There's a lot in those 5 words. It means that supporting men's healing must mean supporting men who have caused harm. And it also means that whatever our gender and whatever the reasons we are hurt, if we stay hurt, we're guaranteed to hurt other people. And we're guaranteed to use whatever tools make that feel as ethically justifiable and righteous to do so. So here I am. I'm a man who's caused serious harm to women. And to the very best of my ability, I've taken responsibility and taken accountability. I'm not saying my accountability work has been perfect, far from it. I've made harmful mistakes while trying to take accountability, and I'm transparent about that. I'm not hiding behind anything. My website is me standing naked in front of you, as is this video. So what will you do with that? Do you only believe in men's healing in the abstract, wishing that hypothetical men would take more accountability? Or do you believe in men's healing when it's an actual man, which is to say when it asks something of you, when it matters? Is your desire for men's healing actually just a shield to hide behind? Or does your desire for men's healing extend to where it hurts? So my transparency about my past reveals deep wounds in the broader society. It shows where large groups of people are still stuck in a colonial model of punitive justice, and reveals how those models are actually harming us all. If people choose to shoot me down, know that I gave them all the ammunition that they're using to do that, and they are choosing to weaponize my accountability in ways that cause catastrophic collateral damage and harm the exact people that they loudly claim to be protecting. In my opinion, that says much more about them than it does about me. In no way am I saying that I am beyond reproach. My work needs meaningful and constructive criticism. To the best of my knowledge, there are no men ahead of me on the particular path that I'm walking. I don't know any men who take the level of public accountability that I do. So I have no mentors in this work, and I'm guaranteed to make a million mistakes in the future as I have in the past. To the best of my knowledge, I am breaking trail here, and I need course corrections and input to do so well. But when the tone of those course corrections is that I'm bad for trying to do what I'm doing, or just irredeemable from my past, that's not constructive. And in the broader cultural process that we're in, it is simply pouring gasoline onto the wildfire of men's harm. So please, critique me, correct me, but for the sake of all our futures and every vulnerable woman in the world, do so in a way that makes the trail I'm trying to blaze appealing and inviting to the young men in both of our lives. Show that this work brings men closer to healthy community instead of just crucifying them for inheriting wounds and patterns that they never asked for and excluding them from community. I know that I need support, and I'm lucky and blessed enough to have it. I am in community with the people I trust the most. Every word on my website has been vetted and approved by a group of the most brilliant women and femmes of color who I've ever known. I mentioned this last because I'm not trying to hide behind them. My arguments and points stand on their own, and I make them on my own, but I regularly have my website reviewed by a community of radical women of color who know me, some of whom are professionals in the field of addressing sexual violence, and I edit and base my work on their suggestions, not the rage of a bunch of strangers on the internet who are mostly white and young. I have notes on a whole series on accountability, but for now I'll just leave this as a teaser. The regular review process that my website undergoes is a layer of my own ongoing accountability. And healthy accountability requires the support of a diverse group of people, centering the identities who have been harmed and professionals who specialize in the harm that's been caused. It also absolutely requires the support of people with your identities, but I think that's much better understood. And they should not be the ones central to confirming that you're on the right track. Let me give you a glimpse of why. Remember that internet dogpile I referenced earlier in response to my video trying to role model how to course correct someone? When that happened, a whole bunch of women who had loudly and publicly supported my work disappeared. Some jumped on that dogpile about how disappointed they were in me, but most just quietly stopped mentioning me, stitching me, engaging the way they had. I could see why. Their righteous vitriol was intense. But some women who had supported me did not disappear. They publicly explained why they thought I was on the right track, if making some mistakes. It might have been hard to see if you weren't me, but there was one clear demographic difference between those two responses that was almost absolute. All the women who I saw disappear or jump on that dog pile were white. And all the women who said they thought I was on the right track and kept publicly engaging with my work were women of color. I only saw one exception to this trend, and they say the exception proves the rule. My wife, who's a woman of color, thought this was bitterly hilarious. They said, almost like the people of color haven't had the privilege to pretend everyone was perfect to begin with. Almost like we understand healing in a way that white people don't because we've had to. I think that white men especially, who haven't spent much time with women of color, have this sense that they would be just really feet to the fire and mean about accountability. And my experience is the exact opposite. And don't get me wrong, they will 100% call you on your and tell you when you're messing up, but in my experience they're also very comfortable saying things like, no, you're good. You've done the healing work you're supposed to do around this issue, and you're now doing exactly what you should be doing. Haters gonna hate, let them, that isn't on you. My experience of white people is that we struggle with this kind of unqualified affirmation. We almost feel like we have to look for something to criticize, especially around issues this emotionally charged. If white people can say these things, there's almost a tone or a look in their eye that feels like it's being dragged out of them, like, no, this looks good. Or overly excited, like, no, that's great, that feels really fake. It doesn't have the tone of actual affirmation or confidence that seems to come really easily to a lot of women of color. And this shows up in critiques as well. In my experience, women of color are often super blunt, direct about criticisms, but it doesn't feel like they are damning you as a person. They're just like, this is dumb, this is wrong, fix this and you're good, don't make me tell you again. If white people can get over our conflict avoidance to say anything at all, our criticism often has this tone that it is a complete condemnation of your entire character, that whatever mistake you've made is wholly unforgivable and you might as well end yourself. It is incredibly harmful, especially because those conversations rarely happen with the person they're even criticizing. So when I say that healthy accountability requires diverse communities, it's in large part because of this wound in whiteness that makes it really hard for us to simply critique behavior instead of damning the entire human being, and makes it really hard for us to honestly affirm growth in a celebratory way, especially about emotionally charged subjects. The amount that white people have to learn from people of color around this and so many things is vast. And I don't think we're capable of doing healthy accountability work without the support of people of color right now, or at least I've never seen it. And I share that piece about how I have my community review and correct my work regularly, partially because I think I may have lied to you a little bit by not mentioning it more and before, in a way that makes me look wiser and stronger and braver than I actually am. I could never do the work that I do alone. Not in a million years. I don't have the insight, the clarity, the embodied intersectionality, or the raw confidence and strength to stand up this publicly and say what I do, let alone stand in the fire of criticism that I do. All of that is a function of my beautiful community that stands behind me. I can do all that. I can speak these words and stand in this fire because I'm just a facet of a much wider, wiser, and stronger community. I'm not saying that everyone in my community agrees with every word I say. They almost certainly don't. And how I say it is often not how they would. I'm saying that without the hands of my community on my back, stabilizing me and grounding me and guiding me, I 100% would not even be alive today, let alone be able to see or share whatever wisdom is in any of my work or this video. It is my confidence in the judgment of my community that allows me to speak at all, let alone withstand the rage of the internet with whatever level of health I manage to do. It's my confidence in my community's health and wisdom that lets me set this clear boundary on my page. If your engagement with my spaces has the effect of driving wounded young men away from healing, you are not welcome here, and I will delete your harmful words and block you for the sake of the young men you're harming, and for the sake of the young women who you're trying to protect. Everyone else is welcome here. Please don't weaponize this. Remember how hurt people, and use whatever tools feel the most righteous, self-victimizing, and vindicating to cause harm. The wounded parts of us will want to use this video and specific things I said in it to shame and punish other wounded people who you can see are causing harm, and it won't help. It won't help anyone. It won't help them, it won't help you, and it won't help the conversation. If you want to engage with wounded people, do so the same way I'm asking people to critique me, with acceptance, love, and guidance. Especially if you're white, try and hear a little of what I'm saying we have to learn here and practice that. Don't conflate this with being nice, or merit-based love, or with cookies. I mean love as in mutual liberation. And part of that is recognizing when we just don't have the spoons to engage in a constructive way. If you just insert yourself without the tools or training or comprehension of how to do so constructively, you're almost certainly causing harm. So, now you know me a little better, and you know the boundaries of my little corner of the internet. You know why I film in the forest. Though I haven't discussed it explicitly as much, if the first half of this video sounded like it was largely about my father, then the second half has largely been about my mother. She has done an astounding level of healing and work, and become one of the wisest people I've ever known, and one of the largest influences in my life. She's a Maine guide, and at 75, she spends her days leading educational sea kayak tours on a coastal land reserve, happily paddling around, teaching about decolonization and why we should follow Indigenous leadership, all through the lens of ecological education. Everything I'm learning today, I can see that my mother has been working towards since before I was born. My whole life, I remember her saying over and over, in her beautiful Maine accent, "The relationships are the most important thing. The relationships are the most important thing." I'm slowly learning what she means. Like I recently found an incredible native elder who speaks publicly named Oren Lyons, and I've been devouring his talks. When I asked my mother if she knew the name, she just laughed and went to her shelf and handed me 2 of his books, shared a handful of incredible things he's taught her. So I'm learning to learn from my mother in a way that my father never did. And I'm trying to listen to things that I don't understand yet. When I shared this script with my wife, they said, "It seems like you're finally stepping out of your own shadow." I know that I don't know what that means yet, but I can feel that it's true, and I'm listening. By some strange circumstance, I find myself filming this in Massachusetts, where I've learned to find the forests, which are actually here. This feels appropriate, like a representation of how maybe my work is largely about helping wounded people who feel like they're in hell find the forests that they don't know are there and don't know how to get to.